Hello and welcome back to the PSD to HTML flat design build. In this lesson we're going to start styling our navigation, our main menu up at the top of the page. And if you remember, this is contained in a nav element, and inside that nav element is an unordered list element. So the nav element we're going to give this medium gray background color to, and that's going to extend out to the edges of the browser window. And then the unordered list will be set to a maximum width of 1000 pixels. And that's where we'll start with the home button and then moving to the right. And each button is going to have a different color background to it. But you'll notice the text is all white. So let's jump into our text editor and get started. Now I've moved all of our files into a new folder, so all the changes we make in this lesson will be saved in the Site 10 folder. And again, we can start by looking at our index.html page. We've already styled our h1 tag here for our header, and now we're going to move on to this nav unit. So again, we have a nav with a class of main nav, and inside that nav, we have this unordered list. And each of our list items inside that unordered list corresponds with an item on our menu. And as we've talked about before, each one of these has a different background color, and we're going to apply those background colors using these classes that we created here, so BG orange, BG purple, etc. So let's jump into our CSS file and get started. Now we're going to start again with the nav element, and again you'll notice it has a class of main nav, and we're going to give that medium gray background color to this nav element and set it to 100% of the width of our browser. So let's go to our main.css file, and just below the header section we're going to create a new commented section for our main navigation. And I like to use these comments because it really helps you to find what you're looking for very quickly in your CSS files. So I want to create a rule for the main nav class, and in that class we're going to set our background color to a value of CD, 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 and then I'm going to set the width here to 100%. So let's save that CSS file, and let's open up our index.html file in Chrome to see what it looks like. So we see that it gave it that light gray background, or that medium gray background, and it looks good so far. Now we need to go in and style the unordered list inside that nav. And you'll see our unordered list, even though the text is centered, you'll notice that we still have bullet points over here on the left. So we need to get rid of those bullet points. And then instead of having these list items stacked on top of each other, they need to be lined up horizontally. So again, let's jump back to our code and let's make that happen. So just below our main nav rule, I'm going to create another rule for main nav space UL. So for the unordered list within that main nav class. So the first thing I'm going to do is set the list style to none. And if we save that, refresh our page, that gets rid of the bullet points on the left, so that's a good start. Now when you're dealing with unordered lists, there's some default padding on the left edge, which is what indents the text a little bit. So let's add a padding left property here and set it to 0 pixels. Then we're going to set the width of this unordered list to the same width as the rest of our main content section, which is going to be 1000 pixels. Also, we want to set the height of our unordered list. If we go back into Photoshop and view our file, and we can just use the marquee selection tool or the rectangular marquee tool and click and drag around this. These buttons are 70 pixels tall. So we want to make this unordered list 70 pixels tall. So we're going to set the height here to 70 pixels. And you'll notice that if we save it now and jump back into Chrome and refresh it, that it's still kind of hard to tell what's going on here. But if we come back and just give it a temporary background color of red, save that and refresh, then we can see that it is taking up 1000 pixels now, but it's lined to the left edge of the browser window. And we want this content area to be centered. So we want to move that 1000 pixels over to the center of the screen. So we're going to go back to our code for this same unordered list, and we're going to add a margin property and set it to 0 space auto. That will horizontally center it in the page. So if we save that and then refresh, now we see that all moves over to the center. So I'm going to get rid of that background color now that we see that we've centered it properly. And then the last thing I'm going to do here for now is I'm going to set the text align property to left. Because remember, in our header up here, we set our text align property to center, which means that all the child elements of that header will inherit that property. And the main nav is a child of that header. So it's inheriting that centered text, which is why our text is centered in our unordered list. So we need to set that text align back to left to basically undo that, to override that. So we can save that and then refresh our page. And now we can see that our text is over here on the left. So now we just need to line up these items next to each other. So we'll create another rule here. We'll skip a couple lines after our UL rule and create a rule for the list items within our main nav. And you could also write this as main nav space UL space LI. Either way, it doesn't matter. I like to keep it as short as possible. So we're just doing dot main nav space LI. And we're going to float our list items to the left. Now, just by doing that, if we save that and refresh, you'll see that aligns these items next to each other. So that's a good start, but we still have a little ways to go there. Let's go back to our code. And next, I'm going to set the width and height for these elements. So I'm going to set the height to the same height as our unordered list. So we're going to make our height 70 pixels. And we haven't set the background color for these yet. So again, I'm going to temporarily set the background color for these list items to red, just so that we can see what's going on there. So let's go ahead and save, well, let's not save it yet. I also want to set the width here. The width for these list items, I'm going to make them 140 pixels each. Now this is a little bit different than the Photoshop design. In the original Photoshop design, they're all a different width based on how much text is inside that particular button. But I've decided to change that a little bit, and I'm going to make them all the same width. So we're going to make them all 140 pixels wide and 70 pixels tall. So let's save that, jump back into Chrome and refresh our page. And there we go. So our text is in the upper left-hand corner of each list item. And the next thing I want to do is to space these out a little bit. And the way I'm going to do that, I'm not actually going to put space between them. Instead, I'm going to put a left border on them. And let me show you why. We'll go back into our Photoshop file. And you'll notice that it looks like, if we zoom in a little bit, it looks like the background color is bleeding into the area in between our list items here. So you might think that you could just use a margin there and it would work. The problem is, if we use a margin, then we'll see the background color for the nav there. And let me show you what I mean. If we go back to our code and let's just give these a margin, just a margin left property of, let's say, 4 pixels. Let's save that, go back to Chrome and refresh. It's kind of hard to see, but if we were able to look really closely at this, we'll see that the color in between these list items is this medium gray color, not the gray color of our background. And the gray color that we want in between these buttons, if we go back to our Photoshop file, is the gray color of our background for the body of our HTML document, not the background for our nav unit. And even to the left of the home button, which is the button on the far left, we have a few pixels of that main background color there as well. So again, we're going to do this, instead of using a margin, we're going to do this by adding a left border to each of our items. So let's go back into TextMate here, and I'm going to get rid of that margin left. And instead, I'm going to come up here to the top, just under the background color here, and we're going to set a border left property. We're going to make it 4 pixels thick. We're going to make it solid, and we're going to give it a value of df, which is the same color as our background for the body of our HTML document. So it won't look like a border. Instead, it will look like there's just space in between these navs, but we're using a border to achieve that space. So again, we're using border left of 4 pixels solid df. So let's save that, go back to our browser and refresh. And now we can see that we have the right color in between each of our items. Now I also want to put 4 pixels of right border on the very last item here, this contact link. Right now, that contact button, that contact menu item, is right up against that medium gray color. So I want to put a right border on the last item, and that's easy to do using the last child pseudo class. So we'll go to the next line here and create a rule for main nav space li colon last hyphen child. So the last list item in that list is going to have a border right property that's identical to this border left property here. So we can just copy that and paste it here, save that, refresh our page, and there we go. Now we have that border on the right side of our last item. Now the alignment of our main navigation here is a little bit off, but we can't really see it just yet. And the only way we're going to be able to see it is if we give the rest of our content a set width and a set background color. So for now, I'm going to jump back into, let's look at our HTML document for a second. After the header closes, we then have a section with a class of main content. And then just inside that main content, we have our feature slider. Now our feature slider here is going to have a white background color. So I'm going to do a couple of things to our main content and our feature slider that allow us to see this issue. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set the width and the margins of our main content, and then we'll set the background for our feature slider, and then we'll be able to see what I'm talking about here, and it'll make a little more sense. So we'll jump back into our CSS file. And then down here at the bottom, I'm just going to go to the very bottom, skip a few lines here, because we're going to come back to these sections later on, but we're going to skip a little bit of space, and we're going to create a rule for our main content. And for the main content div, we're just going to set our width to 1000 pixels and our margins to 0 auto. So we're just setting the width of our main content and centering it on the stage. And in fact, this main content, let's just cut that, and we're going to put it up here near the top. So above our header, below our body and heading tags, we'll skip a couple lines up here and put the main content stuff up here. Then we'll come down to the bottom, skip a few lines, and we'll create a rule again for this feature slider inside that main content. And that feature slider is just going to have a white background. So that's all we're going to worry about for now for the feature slider, is setting the background color. So we'll just make a rule for the feature slider class, and we'll give it a background color of $FFF. So we'll save that, jump back into our browser, and refresh the page. And hopefully now we'll see what the problem is. Over here on the left, you'll notice that the left edge of our content is flush with the left edge of this border that we placed on our home button. However, if we look in our Photoshop file, the left edge of our content here is supposed to be flush with the left edge of that orange background. So it should be flush with the left edge of the background of that home button, not the left edge of the border to the left of the button. So what we need to do is just take our entire navigation unit and nudge it to the left 4 pixels. Because remember, the border on the left side of it is 4 pixels wide. So if we nudge this navigation unit over 4 pixels, then that will get us flush to the left side of our content. Also, we have an issue of the space in between the navigation unit and the white background, but we'll get to that later on. For now, we just want to nudge our entire navigation unit over 4 pixels so that we can get the look we're going for here. So let's jump back into our code, into our CSS file, and we want to nudge this unordered list over to the left 4 pixels. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to give it a position of relative, and then we're going to set the left property to -4 pixels. And that's all we need to do to get it in place. So we'll save that, jump back into Chrome, and watch the menu as we refresh our page. I'm going to hit refresh, Command R, and you'll see it nudges it over 4 pixels, and now the left edge of that home button is flush with the left edge of the rest of our content. Now we've still got a little bit of work to do on our main navigation unit. So with everything saved, let's go ahead and make sure we have everything saved, our index and our main CSS file. And with those saved, we'll go ahead and move on to the next video where we'll finish up the styling for our main navigation. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you then.